join later. Anyway, if you're in, you can actually click the heart so I can see how many people are in. So that, I thank you for that. I always love to get all these lovely little hearts. It makes me feel nice. There is a question option, which someone might have found already. There will be Q&A at the end. I really try to do my best to not talk for the full hour. So if you have questions, write them down, or you can use Mentimeter to actually write them down. Okay. So I'm gonna switch my screen to go to the presentation. Okay. By the way, if you want to stop me during my talk, I'm completely fine, so please feel free. So in my talk, this part of my talk, I'm gonna talk a bit about the background methods. I'm gonna talk about my findings, and I'm gonna end with some interventions and actions, and hopefully you can contribute too. So to start, so as was introduced, this was part of my master in education research, which I submitted last September. So I'm very grateful that I can give a talk here now. If you haven't heard of Master in Education at Imperial, it's a 3 years program which is offered here for teaching staff. So already last year I did my library project, or kind of the essay in the second year, which looked at role models and underrepresented students, and I really wanted to dig deeper, and that's why I kind of came to my topic. So I wanted to introduce myself a little bit, for those who might never have met me. So this is me at the top. I actually already always start my introduction to science class here with this picture, and I pretend it's me as a budding scientist behind the computer, though I'm probably playing Pac-Man. I think it already gives a bit of a snapshot in my childhood. As you might see, I did not really come from an underprivileged background. That's the computer that my father used to write his PhD thesis. You see a lot of scientific books in the background. So I came from a very nurturing STEM background. I did also follow a STEM path myself. Oh, someone is unmuted. Oh.
Your slides aren't showing.
My slides aren't showing.
No.
Oh.
Okay.
Stop the share and try again. Oh, everyone in the chat is exploding. Thank you for that. Maybe stop the share and then try again. They can't see the picture of me being young, and that's why
Yes, for now.
Yeah, for now they do again. Is it showing now?
Yeah, it's working now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, so I'm Dutch, come from the Netherlands, as was introduced by my name. I did a whole career or a whole educational STEM path until I moved to London and actually moved into education, communication, and outreach. So this is actually me at the bottom doing my introduction to science class. I was extracting DNA from strawberries, for those of you who know an experiment. So how did I come from being this person to actually look at the topic that I researched? So I think there's a few steps. No, not anymore. Yes, how did I get to my research topic? So I think there's a lot of steps during my life that brought me here. One of the things that I think is always had an influence on me is my grandmother. So my grandmother is also my biggest role model. She was a Holocaust survivor, and I think she taught me a lot about inequalities and struggles in life. Next to that, I think my secondary school in Amsterdam influenced me a lot. Although it was quite in a privileged area, it attracted kids from all over Amsterdam, and I got to learn a lot from my peers from a lot of different backgrounds, and taught me a lot about stereotyping, inequalities, and the dangers, the effects that this can have on people. During my undergrad and my PhD, I became what was called a role model. And as a role model for women in STEM, I joined an organization to visit primary and secondary schools and try to show girls that also as a woman you can work in STEM. I did, so this is not a real picture, but it does reflect my PhD. So during my PhD, I did get less inspired by doing science myself. So I think it really motivated me to make a switch, and in that switch came me moving to London. And London actually definitely gave me another level of understanding inequalities. I live in Brent, which some of you might know is a very multicultural area. This is the school around the corner where I started a project during lockdown to help kids who, because of lockdown, of course, missed out on a lot of education. And it really taught me a lot about the struggles that a lot of kids go through. And lastly, but very importantly, I started the Invisible Warrior Project. And this is our core team of people with Louisa in the center. Definitely also a role model of mine, but also those of you who don't know, sickle cell disease is mostly prevalent in the Black community. And so working, it brought me way closer to the Black community and taught me a lot about all the struggles they have. So I think there's a lot of things which brought me to actually looking at role models, women, and Black people. And though I do want to say that you don't have to have a link, I always find it really important, and I love this quote, that whatever is happening to underrepresented students shouldn't be fixed by the underrepresented community. I think we should all be interested and all work towards this. Okay, so a little bit about underrepresentation in STEM. So these are just the facts. So Black heritage students are underrepresented, face inequalities in higher education. Women are underrepresented both in STEM higher education, but also here at Imperial. So my research looks both at women and Black students. So this is what we call intersectionality. So I look at both of these, and I really wanted to know, how do these both kind of correlate and interact, and maybe how do they compare? Also, there is quite some data on underrepresented students, but for master, I looked into it. It's often Black students or women, but it's very little looking at both. So I kind of wanted to add a bit of data there. And then the importance of role models. If you don't know this report, please go have a look. It's a great report. It's very lengthy. I also haven't read it all, but there is so much important stuff in there. They also interviewed a lot of students, and there's a lot in there about why role models are so important for underrepresented students, because they need to see someone who looks like them to actually feel they can do the same, they can belong, it's also for them. Okay, so with that, I came to my research questions. So I have two main research questions. Who are these role models, and how do they actually influence Black women to feel at Imperial? So I do have to tell you a bit about my research methods, because it was a qualitative study, which for me was quite new, coming from STEM background. I really had to learn it's not about statistics or numbers, it's about the story. So what I did, I recruited participants who self-identified as Black and women, and who studied STEM at Imperial, because medicine doesn't have an underrepresentation of women. I excluded medicine, and business was excluded as well. And I had a total of 6 participants with a mix from undergrad, postgrad, overseas, home, and the 2 different real STEM faculties. And then I did thematic analysis. I'm not going to bore you with what that is, but it was really new to me, but it was quite exciting to actually learn how to work with it. Okay, what I do have to tell you is my biases and influences, not only because I've learned that those are really important, but I think for you to listen to actually my talk, it's important for you to understand how this talk and the research came about. So first, my biases. So you have to take my background, my experience, my knowledge of what I read and what I didn't read into account, because that made me biased. And in that way, it's really important because I did the interviews. I even wrote the questions of the interviews. I did the analysis. I did the write-up. I made this presentation. So all these choices were made by me. And I have biases. That's why I had to put in like my background, because that will help you to understand hopefully like things I might have missed. Then also I was a big influence. So being a scientist, you always think like, ooh, the temperature or whatever, the pH was off. But I am the influence here in my research. And so I think really important to take into account, although I'm a woman, I'm white. And I think this is very important in my research because it might have different outcome of what participants felt they could share with me. So I think for me, this was the biggest influence. And there is a power imbalance, although I didn't know my participants and I had no influence on their outcomes. I wasn't bribing them with sweets. I was, I think, older than all of them, and they might have seen me as like higher power, which could also affect what they shared or not. And then my approach to research. So there were a few things that I could actually see that I did slightly influence my participants. So on the previous slide, I had kind of the flyer, which tried to recruit my participants. And then one said in the interview, like, oh, when I asked about the role models, they were like, when I thought about this before the interview, la, which meant that was probably based on my flyer. So I was already influencing them before my interview. So there's just a lot going on. So please do take that into account when you listen to my results. So with that, results. So I have 5 different themes. I wrote a lot of text. I can't discuss it all here. I just wanted to give this as a note. If there's topics you want to discuss later, you want to read my whole thesis, very welcome to, please contact me. So findings. This also means Mentimeter. So Paul, we're gonna stop the share and then do the share again, I think. Right?
Yep, yeah.
Oh, it already stopped the sharing. Perfect. So we're gonna get Mentimeter on and then share again. No, other way around, I think. Choose Mentimeter, share, present. Okay, I hope that worked for the people online. So, first question, I want you to have a think, how would you define a role model? This was actually question number 1 for during my interview. Because while you answer, I'm just gonna keep chatting because I love chatting. I did a mock interview, so this was also something we learned. It's really useful to do a mock interview, so I did. Big thanks to Chloe. I did a mock interview, and that helped me to really understand how to do the interview. And the feedback was like, you have to start with actually me thinking about what is a role model, because we talked so much about role models, and we're like, what do you actually mean by a role model? And so I asked all my participants to start with how do you define a role model, and we kept that definition during the interview. So it wasn't me defining, I wanted them to actually think about it. So, age, woohoo, perfect. So, this is great actually. Someone who, there's something about inspiration and aspiration, seems to be the big one. Perfect. Thank you for that. I'm gonna go for the next, so if you haven't pressed enter, do it now. So now I just want you to think about, can you identify role models for yourself? So this is a scale of 1 to 5. Just how easy is it for you to think of a role model?
1 low and 5
Oh,
is many.
Yeah, that should be on your slider, it should say, but indeed, I think when you slide yourself, it gives you text, but if it doesn't work, I'm very sorry.
I think you.
It works perfect. I don't think. Ooh. We're everywhere, but most of you are, what did I say? 1 or 2 is fine. I think that's the middle one. Yeah, Mentimeter didn't allow me to show that on the screen. Okay, thank you for that input. Yes, so we're gonna stop the share. And then share the PowerPoint. This is working. Yes, okay, so I hope that helped. helps you to also think about what my participants said, because actually you're almost representative of my post, so that was good. The problem with the definition is there is no real definition. So also if you go to literature, they even say there is no consensus. So the literature kind of recognizes that, and I think that's also why it was so useful to have that at the start of my interview. And there is this very important paper which kind of looks at 3 different kind of, how do you say, compartments of being a role model, which I used a lot to look at role models. So I think my participants said exactly like you, it's someone who inspires them, or they also said they look up to. In addition, they had a lot of personal kind of additions, which I think also is important to kind of understand. So for them, they had different definition, and it really helped me to understand their answers. Now, I do want to show this slide because for me, it was a very big learning curve to actually know about their role models. And so participants were also on your scale. So some find it very hard. One actually could only find one role model. One just went on a list and was like, okay, that's okay. And during the interview itself, also role models popped up. So in total of all 6 combined, we had 36 role models. And then we split them as first role models. So I kind of said, hey, name 1 role model. So I got this beautiful list of people that also I didn't know all of them. Well, the mother of one of my participants might never know. But this might already show you what the participants had in mind. And then during the interview, we actually got a very nice and diverse list. I do really love this list. So if there's people you've never heard of, like, I couldn't fit it in my talk today, sadly, but a lot of them, the participants shared why they were their role models, and there's a lot of amazing people on this slide, I can tell you, even if you have never heard of them. Okay, and then there's one participant who was really interesting. She mentioned actually companies to be her role model. I won't really dive into this more, but I thought it was quite a refreshing idea. And as you can see, they mentioned Imperial as a role model, so that was really nice. Okay, so who are the role models? So this is, again, take my bias into account. It was based on what they said and what I Googled and who I then defined as Black, white, or man or woman. But as you can see, there's a lot of Black women, which the participant mentioned. Now in literature, there's a definition or kind of a split between role models. You can have inaccessible or accessible. So inaccessible are like pop stars or authors, people you don't know, or you have the accessible ones who are your teacher, maybe me, or a family member. So when I asked, and I asked, but I also analyzed, so part of it is based on my biases again. There was a really big number of inaccessible, which because I did also a bit of self-searching, was like, I don't have inaccessible role models. But then I started thinking a bit. So I think there's 2 main factors. So we know from research that for Black people, same ethnicity role models are very important. So they mainly choose, it's actually the ethnicity to choose it mostly. But also, for instance, if you look at UK teachers or staff at Imperial, there won't be many Black people. So if, as a Black woman, you're looking for a Black role model, you're probably not going to find them in your accessible pool, which is probably one of the reasons why I found so many inaccessible role models. So with that, I come to role models at Imperial. And so there were a few, but sadly not many. So only 2 participants identified people to be their role model. Like I said, there was one who said Imperial itself. And there were a few, especially one I put a quote that said, role model Imperial, I really know those, I don't have them. There is a paper which looks at the difference between colleges with more diversity, so historically Black college compared to potentially white institutes, and they find that Black women find more role models in Black institutes. So I think like the link back to maybe the diversity of what's present at Imperial could have really influenced it. So I also kind of looked at what makes someone a role model. So there's mostly three things. So personality. I love this quote where they were like, it has to be someone you actually really want to meet. Relatability, which could be on many levels, including having similar struggles. And I mainly wanted to chat, of course, about gender and ethnicity and how they compare. So very interestingly, almost all participants said being a woman would make that someone new who I found is going to be more likely to be my role model. And 4 participants said actually being Black, but almost all of them said gender is more important. Now, to note here, they kind of also made an extra comment that say, well, asking for a Black woman might be a bit much, sadly. So they did, so one of the participants said it would be absolute magic to actually have a Black woman to be my role model, but because that's so hard, let's say I want to have a woman, and if I cannot, so Black. With that, I think one of the things that I've found is failure to be so important. Many of the participants shared about the struggles they had coming to Imperial, at Imperial. They shared that being an Imperial and seeing people which seem to have this amazing career which just goes easily doesn't feel relatable to them. So not seeing struggles kind of distance them from people that could potentially be their role models. And so I do want to highlight something which I think is a really great initiative. It's called the CV of Failures. Maybe some of you have heard of it. Yay. So the CV of Failures is a really interesting initiative which motivates people. So it's based on this paper that a person wrote, like, write your CV of everything that went wrong in your career. Apply to this, didn't get it. Try to like apply for funding, didn't get it. And this can really help others to overcome their struggles, realize that people who actually became a professor had so many things. I mean, they even write it's going to be way longer than your normal CV. Luckily, this initiative is already used, so I did not find this out myself. Those of you who might know, so there's a great course kind of things, attributes and aspirations at Imperial, which already partly integrates this. But I kind of want to suggest with my master that it's always important to share failure. So not even only in this initiative, but as a lecturer, you can always, if you talk about things, say, oh, I tried this once, I didn't, because you just become way more accessible for so many people. Okay, ooh, more Menti. So, let me see, share again. Okay, I hope this works. I see hearts. I take this as a yes, and then so many hearts, thank you, people. How do you feel about diversity and representation at Imperial? So, 2 questions. Your own opinion, and what do you think my participants would have said? Again, it's a slidey, and I hope it works that when you slide it sees, but it goes from very high to very low. It's anonymous, I can emphasize.
Do you mean it's very diverse, so it's very important that it should be diverse?
No. What do you feel? Oh, sorry. So, yeah, good. What is your feeling about the diversity now? Do you feel it's high, or do you consider it? Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. My English is not always. Thank you.
And staff or students or both?
Both. It's how you. So it's yeah, it's your perception. So if you wanna, you can interpret it in the way you want. I mean, this is actually also a question I asked my participants. I think literally. Oh, 29. Oh, that's fine, guys. Okay, I like this because, oh, I don't like this, but I mean. Good to see you answer. So we think it's low to very low, but kind of on average, we think that our own opinions might be slightly more positive than the participants. And then I have another question here to remember. Good. To share. Share again. Yes. Okay, so like I said, I asked my participants, how do you feel? So, like you predicted, not so great. So there's a lot we talked about relating this, but first of all, I wanted to kind of see, so what is, like someone already said, is it like the students or the staff? So with the students, I almost asked them for numbers, so women in their cohort really dependent, of course, might be course specific. Black students already got quite low, so the highest we had is 6 in a cohort. Black women in a cohort were very low. So all participants said they were the only one, or there was only one other black woman in their cohort, so the year group. When we talked about staff, so academic staff mainly, they said the number of women is low, black staff, no clue. Black women, I mean, even asking that almost seemed impossible. And I really liked, and this is a quote I put on the front of my thesis, where a student was like, or a participant, I said like black lecturers, and then the participant was like, black lecturer? Never even thought something like that existed. So I mean, of course, it's a bit shocking when you come to that point. But I did appreciate that they shared that with me. And I think they all really felt that way, that black lectures were something elusive, something they might have heard of. It might exist in medicine, but not something they even experienced themselves. So what I was reading on this, and I don't know if you know, but I just found it an interesting thing. The largest demographics of Imperial students are white men and Asian women. I mean, working here wouldn't be a surprise, but I was like, yeah, and then if you're a black woman, And also, when I looked then back at the role models that the participant mentioned, so indeed, at Imperial, none of them were black. Okay. Now, this low representation and diversity that the participants mentioned, they affected multiple things, which I kind of want to go over. So first of all, it affected their academic ambitions. So it started with some saying that all of the supervisors that they had, none of them were black. They said they're lovely people, but it really makes them feel that they don't belong there, it's not for them. One mentioned, I mean, as a positive, but it's something to work towards. That maybe, so someone who didn't want to continue in academia, if they would see more people like that, it could support them actually wanting it. And then, like, when you are the only person as a black woman in a surrounding, it really didn't encourage them. So I think it's a very important thing to take into account that this lack of diversity and representation, which you all recognize, so thanks for that, is really affecting black women not wanting to stay. So with this, we come to something that's called the leaky pipeline, which some of you might have heard of. It's not an official leaky pipeline, but it's loss of people during the career, which is also used for women, but for black women or black staff, it's also very applicable. This is a paper looking at black academics. The black lines are kind of general population, so you see undergrad going really well, but then it really ticks down and is very, very low on academic research or professor level. Now, the problem here is you get a vicious cycle. So you have a low number of black academics, therefore you don't have role models to support black women to want to become academics, therefore you don't get more black academics, and therefore you don't. So there is this vicious cycle going on, which doesn't help us to get more black women in academia. Now, I also looked a bit at belonging, partly because of Wayne's thesis, thank you, Wayne. Because belonging is something very linked to this, and And so belonging, so a feeling of belonging where you study has been linked to a lot of things which are positive, academic outcome, attainment, so belonging is very important. So I did talk to my participants about belonging, and they mentioned actually a variety of reasons. So role models, diversity representation, a community feel, which could be in, for instance, doing work, or links to their department, and also their academic abilities. But what I found really striking was, well, one really said it loudly, money. So the Black women really acknowledge the fact that it's not just that they're Black, not just that they're women, it's the fact they come from a different socioeconomic background, makes them feel very different to their peers, and makes that they feel less like they belong at Imperial. One of the participants talked about that it was both the money, so they really said that it's the money which makes me feel not belong, and not having links to science. They realized that when they came to Imperial that most of their peers on their cohort had parents in science or others in science, and it was something they didn't even think about before coming to Imperial, and they were confronted by this. Now, I do want to add another slide because I think socioeconomic factors really came up a lot, and I think here my biases come in. I was not prepared for this, I had no questions on this, but it came up with so many participants. I mean, I could have known, but it was not like what I wanted to look at in my research. I mean, a participant really pointed out the statistics, being from a Black heritage background means that there's a way higher likelihood that you're from a lower socioeconomic background as well. Also, there were a lot of links to the participants actually mentioning how expensive it is to study in London, study in Imperial. One wanted to continue in academia, didn't know if the funding might actually be a barrier. And some talked about talking about prospective students at events where they talked about scholarships and the students actually realizing there are scholarships. This is something I can actually do. And there was one story which I think was very telling. It was one of my participants. They needed, I don't know how the scheme works, but they said they needed someone who owns a house for something, for their guarantor. And they said, I don't know, anyone who owns a house. And then apparently everyone in their halls kind of turned around. One even said you don't know anyone who owns a house? And they were like, well, we're in a crisis here, it's fine. And I think that really shows what the gap can be between the participants and I think I really like the story because for me it makes me feel how they might feel. Then a bit more on the socioeconomic part and how it affects them. They also talk about that they have to work through uni to actually be able to pay it, how that adds to their stress, that could of course also affect their outcomes, etc., etc. And I think one student really nicely pointed out, which I loved, was looking at effort in versus being exceptional. For them to be able to get probably good grades, but work next to it, have no links to science, to all of that is way more impressive than just someone else who has all this support and then has a higher mark. And kind of pointing out that this is something that would have helped them during if that was recognized by Imperial. Now, I do want to mention this, so this is sadly another dark side of my research, that a lot of the participants, well, all the participants actually mentioned a lot of negative effects of this low diversity and representation. So first of all, what I mentioned is feeling a lot of stress and a burden for being the only one, for often being the only Black woman in a room, which made them feel that they represented a group that wasn't there. And there is, if you haven't seen this, please do. There's a TED talk from Chimamanda Ngozi, which is amazing. I hope I pronounced her name correctly, about the danger of a single story, and exactly this. Because it's all about how, if you only know one person, you extrapolate. I mean, I think we all know this. If you met one, I don't know, person with hat on, you're like, oh, for all persons with a hat, block my view. But that works in any case. Next to that, a lot of participants mentioned that they felt like a token or a prop or being pigeonholed. There was a story which I found very important, especially having worked in education, still working, that one participant mentioned they had a few Black students on their course, and they said for all the group work, and they did a lot of group work where they always change group, they've never been with another Black student in the group. And apparently it was kind of the running joke in their cohort. They were like, oh yeah, we're never gonna be with each other because we're both Black, they're never gonna do that. And coming from the educator view, it's like, oh yeah, we wanna like have every group representative, blah, 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 but never thought about the effects of what this makes someone feel. So I think I find it a really important story for us all to reflect what does it actually mean when we do these things. Like I remember we always check for gender, that we don't have like only the girls groups and the boys groups, but never really thought about what does it mean for the student when we do this. And they did mention that they felt if there would be, because my participants said we would never ever discuss this, but they thought like maybe if there was a Black lecturer who would see that, they could, because they can relate to that, they could mention it and they could bring it up. So they felt if there was more representation, these things might actually not happen and not have this effect. And then lastly, sadly, all participants shared instances of racism, sexism, and actually a lot of misogyny. Won't go into the details, there is a lot there if you want to talk about it more. Okay, so what can we do? Let's try to be a bit positive. So, shout out to all my new colleagues in outreach. Outreach was mentioned very, very positively. A lot of participants, when I said like, do you know anything that Imperial does to change this? They were like, outreach is amazing. So doing outreach was really recognized as a very, very important step. First of all, they met role models. So I love a story of one of the participants. So there's these twins who study at Imperial, but also do piano and a lot of things. And really, so one of my participants met them before going to Imperial, and they were like, you can do STEM and something creative, and that actually inspired them. Well, became their role models to come to Imperial, do the same. And what I found interesting is they said it's not always just coming to Imperial, it can be going to uni in general. One of my participants had never been at an outreach event at Imperial, but at other ones. And she said, because if you're from a background like me, if you don't have links to uni, just going to events like this makes you realize what uni life is about and can really help. And then also, it helps them coming to Imperial. One talked about, it was a lovely story about when she was in school, she came to an outreach event, and it was, they were set like activities, and then she would come back, and there was this one student helper where they really got on and it helped them. And the participant said like 10 years later, she would still recognize him on the street because it was such an important event or a moment for them to know, I want to go to Imperial. So a lot of positivity there. And there are a few things to note when we talked about outreach. So first of all, having a safe environment and having these in a way that actually supports Black women. Because sadly, they also, my participants shared of what could happen during outreach event, which pushed them away from university. So one participant shared going to, I think it was Cambridge, without naming names, to an outreach event where there was a racist incident and no one did anything. And the participant was like, if already in outreach, this is what happens, I cannot go to this university for very obvious reasons. So I think this is something really, really important. If you do the outreach, of course, you should protect everyone there. I know it wasn't Cambridge because STEP is Cambridge, so remove Cambridge from my recording. STEP is Cambridge. So some of you might know if you want to do specific courses at Cambridge, you have to do an entry exam, but this entry exam you practice for. So this student, I think, had 3 A stars and still was not allowed to go to Cambridge because this student already got herself through like school, but no way to pay for tuition. And well, was actually in the end came here, so good stuff. And then diversity of staff and students at the event. So for a Black woman to see other Black women at these events, like the participants actually of my study have been at these events and they said like seeing others was so important for them to actually feel they want to go there. So shout out to Hannah if you're there. So STEM Futures is one of Imperial's outreach programs which is specifically aimed at Black women. So of course this does tick a lot of these boxes. Now, in general, safety came up a lot. So this quote was from one of my participants, which I think is really nice. So if you want to invite Black women over, you've got to make sure that your house is clean. It's a metaphor, but I guess you got that. So they felt that the report and support mechanisms at Imperial were very inefficient. They mentioned it, a flip of a coin. And they even mentioned that it was one of their reasons to not want to continue in academia because they felt if their PhD wasn't going great and their supervisor wouldn't be supportive, they wouldn't feel that Imperial as a mechanism would support them. So I think this is a very, very, very important point that they didn't feel supported. And they also said that the training, so we had this EDI training for staff and students. They felt they were very insufficient and did not help the fact that all of them felt or had experiences with sexism, racism and misogyny shows that it's there and they felt there should be training to make sure this actually doesn't happen. I mean, we can work on the report and support, but of course we never want to get there. We want to make sure that it just never happens. Again, the report, which I love, has a lot of suggestions how to make this better. And I think a great way to actually improve these trainings is include storytelling, include insights. There's this really interesting quote in this paper over here, which kind of comes back to that story about like the money and that like the participant had a story that they didn't know anyone who owned a house. I read this paper and I was like, that's actually the case. Like for me, I'm part of the more, I'm part of the bigger part of Imperial students and staff. And I would never question, do I belong? Do people look at me? I mean, I just rock up here and I fit in. But you don't realize that because you're part of the bigger part. So the best way to actually tackle this is by storytelling. So there's 2 great initiatives. Shout out to Wayne. So if you have never heard of Belonging, please Google it. So Belonging is an amazing initiative from Wayne, which interviews people from the community to tell about their stories. And there's more than 100. They're all on YouTube and they're all amazing. If you can't choose, Wayne even has his like top 10 list. There's so many amazing ones. If you scroll through them, you would even find me for 2 minutes on one of them. And then Shifting the Lens is another great initiative which highlights diversity of staffs and students. So I think using more of these initiatives to target a lot of stuff. I mean, you're obviously not the target here because you're all aware, but I think it's a great way. Okay, and just lastly, a little note on societies, which goes to students or my participants said it's a great safe space. And what also happened, what I thought was a really interesting example, is one of the participants said they contacted someone via Instagram before they went to Imperial and of one of the societies to check how they felt. So it's actually a really interesting way for future students to make links at Imperial before they're here. And I think very important with that, a lot of students mentioned that because of the lack of diversity, a lot of the ethnicity-related societies are struggling. So I think it's because it's a place where future Black women want to find information, it would be great to support these societies to actually make sure that they stay alive. Okay, I did want to put in a slide on teaching interventions, in case any of you are teaching, which you probably are. So a big thing, I don't know if you heard about it, is decolonizing the curriculum. So I asked my participants, so what about your curriculum? Do you have like great examples of like Black or female like scientists? Not really. And so they say mainly because all the lecturers are white men. This is their examples. Maybe a female lecturer will then say it wasn't a white man, it was actually a lady who found this. But the curriculum is quite what we call white. If you haven't seen this, there's an amazing YouTube video about why is my curriculum white. Please check it out. Another thing that came up was cohort building. There was a participant, and I thought it was a really interesting story. And this participant had been at a different university and then came for their postgrad at Imperial. And they said, like, when I asked about like the gender diversity, they were like, well, I'm not even sure, I think it's 50-50. And then when I asked someone, and they were like, oh, it's only 30% women. And they didn't even realize, and they said, because we're such a tight-knit cohort, I don't even feel that there's less women. And they said when they were at their other university, there was quite a split in between the men and the women, and there was a lot of looking down of the men on the women. So I think cohort building, I mean, it's something when I teach, I always try to do, but you kind of more do it as an icebreaker and something fun, but actually it can have so many more beneficial effects. Also, feeling of belonging is linked to that. And what I thought, you can actually decolonize the curriculum using your students, having them talk to each other about their background. So it can be kind of a bonding experience while you decolonize the curriculum, because you can just ask your students, like, I mean, when I asked this just 6 Black women to mention their role models, there came a list of people I've never heard of. And that's what the students are. They have so much knowledge. So I think it's a great kind of combination you can have there. I talked about group work, being mindful and emphasizing failure. So I think all of this can be very useful in teaching. Now, lastly, I do want to add this because it came out of my research, but it's there also in literature. If we want to support Black women, we have to listen to them. It's one of the quotes of my students, but it's also, again, the report I really love. It says like, listen to them and make sure you actually do something. Don't listen to them as a tick box exercise, but do something with the information. But then on the other hand, try to make sure, it's the quote I started with, don't put it on them. Don't listen to them and then say, okay, good, you go and do this now. We all have to work together. And I think there was a great quote, one of my participants, they were like in conversation with someone and were explaining like their struggles, and the person was like, you should share this more. And we're like, no, I can't. If I share this all the time, it's really exhausting. And I think that's just good to take into account. We listen to them, but we don't say, you go and now educate everyone. So it's also about, I think Wayne might recognize this quote. It's yours. It's about self-education. So please, if you take one thing away, just Google a great Black woman who done something amazing and share that. Okay, and with that, I come to my last motivator. Share. Yay, Alex, thank you. It's working. Yes. So you have to be active. What are you gonna do to support Black women in Imperial? It can be already, I mean, I gave you one, you can look up someone or tell their story. Or anything else. I'm actually gonna show this one, so. When you wanna take all of these home?
I'm just waiting till you finish and then we'll have to take a drink.
Show up to more belonging sessions. There you go. Perfect. This is great, so I have 5 minutes officially to do, because this was my last slide. There's the thank you slide, which I'll grab later, but it's just mainly saying thank you. Someone is testing my Q&A. Perfect. Let's do the Q&A. Any questions? I can also, if people want to put it in the chat. Should I stop share? Maybe not, because then we get the whole. What's the best way to do this? I can probably do it this and then. People online in the chat. Okay, any questions? Yes, thank you.
I was interested in if you notice any differences between home international students or also undergraduate and postgraduate students in PPE.
Not really, actually. So there was a bit of kind of the suggestions about what should change. So there were things that I didn't go into, like how to get more Black women into Imperial. This was slightly different because, of course, you base it slightly on your own. So there was a great story from an international student who actually said, never heard about Imperial before I applied. And like a lot of schools or universities go to Africa to actually raise awareness. And that helps them get more Black women in, which of course, like the home students didn't say. So there were a few kind of like these suggestions, but in a feeling of like the belonging, the role models. I mean, to be fair, because it wasn't quantitative research, I didn't want to put them in groups and do averages, but there wasn't much. Like sometimes I did check like, oh, was this participant home or overseas to kind of, and it never really, yeah. No, so I think no.
Just seen a point which Eric's put there. If there's no input into the pipeline, is it not leaking?
Sorry, what's up? Oh yeah.
I had a question, thank you. So I know it's a bit unfair to ask you about the research that you didn't do, but in medicine and business school, do you think that they are doing something right, or is it an artifact of admissions processes that we've just got more diversity?
So I think a big thing, I don't know, am I still, I show on the Zoom, right? Yes. So I think I was happy that I excluded medicine because, so there were participants who said, I've heard of people in medicine who are Black, it is there, but they kind of said, it feels really distant from us because they're normally not in the South Kent campus. So even if they might have Black lecturers, not looking at anyone, it doesn't feel that can be a role model for me, or in a way feel that makes me feel I want to be in academia. I had another point. Yes, there were, I think, one or maybe a few participants who said they didn't want to do medicine. They actually want to do their specific STEM career, which was a struggle for them because they had to fight with their family. Because medicine, like business, is one of the like, they called it like the immigrant dream. So they felt that actually not being in medicine was part of their struggle. And it's what's her name? The great activist, forgot her name. Michaela Loach, thank you. She started medicine and actually dropped out or something to become an activist. So I think including medicine, so medicine is a different story altogether. And I think that's just so not one of the things you said. I think the whole story why Black women end up there is very different to STEM. Thank you. Oh, over there.
Thank you. Please feel free, if this is better suited to an email or afterwards, I wanted to ask about how you learn to do education research coming from a STEM background. I'm currently a degree undergraduate, and this is kind of what I want to do, and I'm applying for things, but I don't know what I'm doing, or like how you develop knowledge of social research methods or anything like that. So how did you find the kind of transition, and did you have
Well, he sat right there in front of me.
Pointing at this.
Pointing to it.
Total biscuit. Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you. I transitioned from botany biochemistry into science communication and just done a qualitative PhD. But so did you.
Yeah, so I mean, so the route I took, I went to do the education, and if you are a teacher at Imperial, you can do this masters. And in the masters, so I had no clue, during the masters, they teach you how to do this, which some people in the room here can tell you that there's a process there.
But that would be for staff, but if you're a student,
Yes.
and I'm very biased, so take this with a pinch of salt. But our masters in science communication in this department
Yeah, I did
does a
that.
lot of will teach you the type of research methods that would be useful as well for something like this. But this is a shameless one.
Qualitative research is lovely, isn't it?
It is.
Actually, can I just make a point related to that? I mean, we do use the term bias, but I'm thinking it's got such negative connotations that we should rather be talking about positionality or subjectivities, because we want to welcome people bringing their subjectivities to research. It's part of the story, as you so eloquently demonstrated. So I think we should move away from the word bias and talk about subjectivities and positionalities, so that, you know, we can love our own subjectivities rather than seeing it as fighting against the objectivity of our research. It's not meant to be objective. It is gloriously subjective, and that is the strength of it.
I agree. Perfect. I think I have to finish. Or not. If people want to stay, I'm happy to answer questions. If you want to leave, let's put my thank you slide on. And just because all the people I want to thank might not be here, that's okay. So I just want to say big thank you. Please feel free to always drop me an email. I'm also on Teams. I have a difficult last name, so apologies for that. I mean, my biggest thanks is to the participants in my research who gave up their time and actually did what they said is really hard to share their story and basically ask me to listen. So I hope with this I can share their story. Big thanks to my supervisor, my MED cohort, some of them are here, thank you. Thank you CLCC for actually giving me the chance, supporting me, and getting me a lovely video. Faculty of Medicine, where I was based while I did my master outreach, for welcoming me, and everyone. I had a lot of support for actually a lot of people in this room and during my masters, and a lot of people online, so thank you for joining. So thank you so much.